Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa, Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and we are live for the first time this week, and we would love to hear from you, so give us a call, please. 888-564-6173 is the number. 888-564-6173. We're here till 4 p.m. and would love to hear from you. If you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok, you can call 888-564-6173. The number's right there on the bottom of your screen. And answering your questions today, we've got the great Dr. Bobby Conway from Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. John, what's your name again? Bobby is also the guy you see on the 1 Minute Apologist channel on YouTube. John Hwang is here in the studio. He's sitting in for Pastor Brian Broderson, who just got back from Israel and then got on another plane and went somewhere else. It's like, dude, yep. So you're here. Great.
I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with the two of you guys.
Glad to see you, bro.
Always good to be with you guys. And before we go to the phones, let's take some questions that were sent in on Facebook. Here's one that has to do with yesterday's program. Now, if you didn't get a chance to listen yesterday, go back and listen to the archive. We had it was one of those shows where just a lot of ministry took place, a lot of hurting people called in, and we got a chance to talk to them and to minister to their needs. But this one here, I have a problem with family who refuses to reconcile with me, and yet they continue to do things like show up on my property and act like nothing's wrong, and then they'll do something evil, like threaten to call children's services, etc. It's always bait and switch. There's been a lot of abuse. I've tried to leave the door open because I felt like that was the Christ-like thing to do. But they torment me. They refuse to reconcile. They refuse to admit that anything was ever done wrong, but they continue to do cruel things. What can one do when the abuse continues, even though I've moved on and have a family of my own? Of course, we've put guards up to stop any physical abuse, but I've left the door open for reconciliation and for repentance. None has been given, but they continually poke and harass, and it always comes at the worst time and when I least expect it. I choose forgiveness every time. My heart is broken over this, but choosing forgiveness does not seem to make it any easier. The pain is still there, and the pain is stoked by their actions. What can one do? John, we'll start with you. What do you say?
Wow. Well, from what we heard in that little piece there, it sounds like this person has drawn some really clear lines. They've sought to reconcile, but it sounds like the other party's unwilling to reconcile. They've sought to set up boundaries, but the boundaries aren't being respected. And yet at the same time, we could appreciate the fact that they're wanting to leave the door open just in case that reconciliation can happen. But at this point, that's something that's going to have to be proven by the people that are, from this person's comments, causing harm. And so this is where, as difficult as things would be, this is where, sometimes you might have to, depending upon what the case is, go as far as putting a restraining order on. Like, if you at any point feel like the harassment is getting to the point where it's abuse, or you get to a point where you feel like your life is in danger, or you feel like there's harassment that's being issue to your family member, then I think that, after having set those boundaries, if those boundaries aren't being respected, then there could be a case to be made for, bringing in some legal, boundaries. And so, this is just one of those things. It's like, I wish I had that silver bullet answer to this person's question, but I think that this is something that this person's going to have to, maybe sit down and talk with their pastor and work through this. But also, if it ever gets to a point, because I've known people that have been in situations like this where harassment is very real and it's gotten really intense, and there is this disrespect of boundaries. And it doesn't mean that the person's unwilling to forgive. It doesn't mean that the person's unwilling to pursue reconciliation. But when that's been exhausted and the other parties just keep taking advantage of this person's willingness to forgive to the point that the person is in that really difficult place of just feeling like, man, our life is just not at peace, then in cases like that, I've seen where the only pathway towards trying to find any kind of peace is through taking on some legal matters. And so but yeah, that's a hard one, and this is one of those things that I wish we would be able to sit down and just kind of talk through and work through the issues together.
All right. Thanks for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger, and let's do at least one more from Facebook before we go to the phones at 888-564-6173. Here's one. Hello, my name is Angel. I always write down questions that I have from the Bible to ask Pastor's perspective in hopes to get the courage to call one day and actually ask. But for now, here's my first question. It has to do with 1 Corinthians 11:5, which reads that every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is one and the same as if her head were shaved. So Angel wants to know, does this mean women should literally wear coverings over their heads when praying, or is this a metaphor for women to have long hair, or does it refer to something else entirely? Bobby, what do you say?
I would take this as a cultural.
Whoop, we can't hear you all of a sudden. Hold on. I don't think Bobby can hear us either because he's still speaking. We can't hear you at all right now, Bobby. So, John, let's switch over to you. Go ahead and you take this one. What would you say?
Well, I'm just looking at Bobby right now. This is
Bobby thinks he's answering this question, and it's probably the best answer ever, and we can't hear it. Oh, he just pushed a button.
There you are.
There you are. We couldn't hear a thing you said. Goodness. And you couldn't hear us either.
Oh, my word.
But it was the best.
No, I couldn't.
I'm sure you were giving like the best answer to this passage.
If anybody watching on Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok knows how to read lips, they just got the best answer ever. But for the rest of us, Bobby,
that's hilarious.
How would you answer that?
Okay. Well, I was just testing everybody to see if you had the gift of hearing.
I guess not.
Hearing what can't be heard.
Yes.
I would take this passage in 1 Corinthians as more cultural, as a way to, demonstrate gender distinction and, a way that one.
Oh, not again. We just lost you again. Maybe you're going to have to hold that button down or something. I don't know. That's odd. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know what's happening is somehow or another, the switch is getting triggered.
We're going to have to call the Geek Squad. Can they come out to Bobby's house and fix this?
Yeah, I don't know what's happening with it, but it keeps going.
Yeah. Well, John, go ahead and continue until Bobby can figure out what might be going on.
Yeah, I think that what Bobby was talking about is just the cultural situation here, and because there was definitely something very real happening in Corinth at this time. And so, it's interesting when the issues of long hair come up, the question then comes in as, well, how long is too long? Especially it's not just talking about women, but it's also talking about men. And then with having head coverings, isn't it interesting that there it's like, having your head not covered and or having your head covered in God's presence, but in nowadays it's like I grew up in a time when having a hat on during prayer, or for men having hats on, or
on a radio program,
like I am, or at church, that was a sign of disrespect, And so I think that there are those cultural things. And so, when Paul the Apostle is writing, on this situation here in Corinth, I agree with Bobby. I don't think that this is to be a universal mandate for all the churches, but I think that there is a principle that is to be recognized. And one, as Bobby was talking about, there is that clear gender distinction. And I think that that's a good word for us in our society today, where it just seems to be so much confusion about that. But also the other principle of submission, as people would come in the presence of the Lord and they would pray and prophesy, especially in the case of women in that time and culture. that there was a clear mark of saying, hey, I am submitted to my leaders, I'm submitted to my husband, and it doesn't mean inferiority, it just means the ordering in that relationship, because earlier, you remember, Paul the Apostle said that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. And so we know theologically that God the Son is not inferior to God the Father, and yet within the economy of the Trinity, there is that deference. And so I think that there are those principles that we can learn from these passages, but in terms of like head covering, I don't think that that's a universal mandate for the church today.
Bobby, are you back?
Yeah, I am. The cord on the back of my little monitor wasn't fully plugged in. But you can always know that the problem is on me when we have these technical glitches.
Not always.
I am not your savvy, AV guy when it comes to this stuff.
No worries. Well, we heard what John had to say. I don't know if you were able to hear how John answered that question, but did you want to add anything, some insight onto the whole head covering issue?
I did not hear what he said, but I have the utmost confidence that John crushed it. Absolute slam dunk.
Well, of course he did. Yes. But did you have any? Okay, John.
No, I just want to hear what Bobby has to say about this, because I thought that where you were going was really good. The last thing that we heard from you is you were talking about gender distinction, and then you went out. And I think that the audience would really love to hear like where you're going with that thought on that.
Well, I do think, John, that it would be an incredibly difficult principle to apply in today's culture. So that would be just very, very difficult. It's almost a little bit bizarre when you think about it, like, okay, putting this, hat on, so to speak, covering your head. It's almost hard to imagine that you would be dishonoring to the Lord by not doing that. But I can see in a particular culture, if that was a value, then that makes sense. But a lot of people might feel, like they're being completely dishonored by being told to start wearing a hat to church. Mm-hmm. Some churches have tried this, and it works for some churches. I would imagine they have a lot of challenges as well in doing that. Now, some would, challenge me and say, well, we have to just trust the Lord to build the church how he wants. And, if people don't want to comply, then we'll just have to go with it. But for me, I think that it is much more easy to see as a cultural issue and not something that we need to impose. Now, there are some ladies that, I've even seen at times, they just feel better coming in with their head covered. They want to almost just be safe, just in case. Mm-hmm. Some would not feel like they need to. They just do it out of symbolism. And I would say that's a conscience thing for people, and we should respect people's opinions on that. But I would say that's not going to be the hill that I'm ready to die on, especially given all the battles that we're going up against in today's culture. I do think the Bible has some challenging things to say as it relates to modesty. And I wonder, my son was talking to me recently, and he's like, Dad, if we just took the Bible and we got stranded on an island and you were just left with the Bible and you didn't have a culture that you were trying to consider, all you were doing was just thinking about what the Bible has to say. I wonder how much we've been influenced by our own culture as it relates to interpreting the Bible. And I would say that there's bias that we all have, and we need to admit that. If we don't recognize that there's bias in all of us, I think it's impossible for any of us to be 100% completely objective. And the greatest way we can move towards some objectivity is just to be objective enough to say that none of us are completely objective. I think that when it comes to the area of modesty, I wouldn't be surprised if we think we're being modest at times. And I'm not speaking about just ladies out there, but just us in general. I think that the ancient Near Eastern culture was a much more modest culture than we are. When you look at some of the stuff that is said in the scripture, now going back to women about, not letting your beauty be inward, not with the adorning of jewelry. And then you think about how much emphasis and time goes now back to men and women for fashion, for taking care of the outward appearance, trying to not age. So it is a tough balance, and I would not pretend to know what exactly this looks like. But I wouldn't want to say that we should, take an Amish stance and become completely, secluded from the culture in that way either. So that's a little bit of what I would say, John. I think that that's a cultural thing, but I do think that our cultural issues are influencing us, and we don't look much different than the world in our appearance. And I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. I mean, like, I'm certainly not going to go out and buy a pair of overalls and construction boots and start sporting that just to try to feel like I'm, cleaning things up. So Lord help us.
Yeah.
Angel, thanks for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. Now let's go to the phones at 888-564-6173, starting with Lynn in California. What's going on, Lynn?
Hi.
Hello.
How are you guys? Hello?
Doing well, thanks.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for taking my call. I really enjoy the program, and I'm happy.
You know what? We're getting a lot of background noise from you. I don't know what that is.
Rain is pouring down hard.
Oh, my goodness. Are you outside?
Coming down. Yeah, I'm in my car.
With the windows down?
No.
Oh, okay. It's just that hard. Wow. Crazy.
Up.
It never rains in Southern California, they say. Well, they lied.
True. I have this question that's been troubling me for quite some time. Since the pandemic, and because my mom has had a stroke and not able to get around so well, I haven't taken her back to church physically. We don't normally attend Calvary Chapel, South Bay. And her mobility is not that good. It's really hard for her to get around. So we've just been watching a program on TV every Sunday faithfully. And I'm torn about where we should be sending our tithe.
Okay. John, what would you suggest?
Well, I guess I'd start with the question, Lynn, do you still consider Calvary Chapel South Bay your home church?
Yeah, but I haven't been there in really since the pandemic. We haven't been back.
So, but have you been watching online services from there?
No, my mom, I'm sorry, she likes Pastor Stanley, and she's not that digitally savvy, so it's just easier to put something on TV for her.
So where would you consider your home church?
I don't know. I'm torn. I'm really torn. I'm really torn. It's like, do I split it? Because if the situation was different, I would be at Calvary Chapel. But because of the situation, and I mean, I pray it improves, but my mom is almost 80 years old. So it is what it is.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, you're going to have you're gonna have to decide. And Paul the Apostle, when he wrote to the Corinthians, he spoke about giving cheerfully. He spoke about giving liberally, and this is an opportunity for you to make investments into God's kingdom work in the world. Paul the Apostle also speaks about sharing all good things with those who teach. So there's obviously, this understanding that there are people that God places in our lives where we receive the word and we're ministered to, and we're nourished and protected and equipped by the word through different people and ministries. And so we want to be able to recognize with that and sharing all good things with them. But I've generally encouraged people, as you think about where to make those investments, a great place to start would be your home church, because this is where you get to partner with a local church fellowship where you identify with, and you get to be shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm with people, brothers and sisters in Jesus, and you guys are working together in that mission of Jesus in the world together. And so I think this is one of the reasons why it's so helpful to be connected with a local church, not only digitally, but I understand your situation, but for those that are listening, we really do encourage like physical involvement in the local church. But if you feel like, gosh, this one particular church is the one that I would call my home church if it wasn't for my mom's condition, then I would encourage you to just continue investing there. But if you feel like where you're being ministered to, by watching Charles Stanley, and you want to help out with the ministry there, then I think that, if you feel like you want to be able to give a little there so to support that ministry so they're able to continue, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I would just encourage you to really think through, like, where is my home church? Where's my local church that I belong to? Because I want to partner in that context, in this kingdom mission in the world.
Bobby, what would you say? I think it's great that Lynn is even kind of having these thoughts, because a lot of times people will call and say, do I have to tithe? Do I tithe on gross or net? It's just all these, I don't want to say excuses, but just looking for ways to maybe not tithe if they don't have to. Lynn's saying, I want to tithe, I just don't know who to tithe to. Bobby?
Well, I would agree with John. I mean, I think that if you have a sense of place, but maybe you just can't get there because of circumstances, then that is something that might have you feeling torn, but at least your heart's still in the right spot and you still want to give. There are lots of ministries out there that have needs and that would welcome, somebody that's kind of in a bit of a meandering space for this season. And so I would say, think about ministries that encourage you and that could have, financial resources, church plants. Are there church plants out there that that you could invest in? I think that a lot of times they're trying to get their mission off the ground. Do you know of a church plant that in your area or something that you might want to help out with? So I would just think about those type of things right there.
Lynn, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173 is our number. We're here till 4 p.m. Pacific time today to answer your questions. And answering the questions today, John Hwang from Calvary Chapel, Costa, Mesa. He's sitting in for Brian Broderson. And Bobby Conway, who's got a church plant, Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can find out more about it at imagechurch.live. 888-564-6173. It's election day. Maggie's got a question about that. What's up, Maggie?
So I voted already, so you don't have to take that into consideration in your answer. And I haven't voted probably for 40 years because it's hard to know.
Wait. This is your first time voting in 40 years?
Yep.
Wow. Okay, go on. I just wanted to make sure that's what you said.
Well, I got really disenchanted because, like back in the 80s, when there wasn't an internet, I would get all of the pamphlets and all of the information in paper, and I would spend hours and hours and hours reading them and try to make a decision. And then sometimes, like you might vote no, and it's a unanimous no, but somebody says, well, it's Supreme Court overturned it and it has to be yes.
Right.
So I just got really disillusioned. But Dr. Tony Evans really convicted my heart in his talk about voting. So I did gather all the information I could, and I have voted already. But what I want to know is, when there really isn't a good choice, like voting biblically, when there really isn't a person that really even seems to have some biblical values, is it better to choose the lesser of two evils, or do we just not vote on that one?
Bobby, what would you say to Maggie?
Well, I would think that that's the case, Maggie, that yes, you're going to want to choose between the lesser of two evils, because if you don't choose between the lesser of two evils, then your vote of silence will go to the greater of two evils. And so we're stuck in a bit of a bind there. I would agree with you that there is no perfect party here. And I'm a person that is, a registered independent. But there used to be a time where the parties were a lot closer. It was kind of the abortion issue that has been around for a long time that was the real main area that caused people to say, hey, I'm not comfortable casting my vote this way. But now, when you step back and you think about how far left progressive the Democratic Party has went, it makes it a lot clearer, I think, for me as a Christian. So I put out some points today as I wrote to our church and to my Facebook audience about how do you enter the voting booth. And your point was one of the things that I brought up, that, to not cast a vote, basically then that silence is just going to allow the greater of two evils to build. And so I don't think checking out altogether is the right thing to do. And I'm so glad to hear that you went ahead and voted. But I would say I, like you, would not think that just because I'm casting a vote that I think that this is some great ideal. I mean, our hope is not in the political kingdom. But when you do think about how progressive things are, I mean, you're talking about pronoun obsession, LGBTQ plus obsession, homosexual marriage, when it comes to things like legalizing drug use, moving toward euthanasia. I mean, what I encouraged our church to do was take the issues and write them down and then ask, well, what would the Bible teach about these issues? And then think about the candidates on both sides. And unless our head is in the sand, it's just clear as day that you're going to have a hard time arguing ethically that the program that comes out more moral is the progressive party on this. You know what? I never would have said this stuff in the past. I was always very careful. But with CRT, the emergence of Marxism and as a potential down the road, I think pastors are going to have some more guts to speak out on these issues. Because I think what's happening is there's lots of pastors, they're conservative on these moral issues, and they know it. But then to say, oh, it just doesn't really matter as long as you go, well, if they have any ethical stance on the Bible on these issues, they know exactly what to say. So we wouldn't, and I don't understand why we're silent. Like about we'll speak up in other areas when it comes to movies and music, but then when it comes to politics, we're just going to stay really quiet here. So I'm getting to a point where I'm realizing that there's a little bit of a hypocrisy in me here, where I'm getting quiet in this area, where I don't fully guide the flock in the name of, because listen, there comes a point that I would say to anybody, I'd say, okay, well, is there a place where a party can go so off the ledge that you will speak up, that you will take a stand, that you will say this is wrong? Because Dietrich Bonhoeffer had to do that back in Germany. So what's it going to take for us to finally speak up? And will it be too late? So I'm at the point where I'm ready to speak up. Like I'm ready to say, if we don't start speaking up, the future will be Marxism in the United States of America. Critical theories will overthrow things as we know it. Education in the school will be absolutely devastating. So in the name of speaking up, I'm going to take a Bonhoefferian approach and start saying, church, we need to come out of the closet. We need not be silent, and we don't need to fool ourselves in thinking that the issues of the political party can fit with us biblically. To do so would have to be eisegesis, not clear exegesis.
Time to take a break on Pastor's Perspective. We'll get to more of your calls between now and 4 p.m. Pacific time. Today, Election Day. Go out and vote if you haven't already. But give us a call if you've got a question at 888-564-6173. 888-564-6173. We're back on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173 is our number. 888-564-6173. It's Election Day. We just had a great conversation about the topic when Maggie called in. We had another call that wanted to ask, but maybe, I guess, the question was answered. So we can go back to it if somebody else calls, but we've only got about 25 minutes left. Give us a call at 888-564-6173. Anything else you wanted to add, Bobby? The music came on and maybe you still were mid-thought.
Sure. Well, I mean, I know that maybe some listening would say, well, you know, then you're just a Republican. And I'd say, I really don't consider myself a Republican. I consider myself an independent. I really am not somebody that when I look at the Bible, think that, you know, I can make a perfect case for the Republican Party using biblical principles. So it truly is something of looking at where we are and realizing, which group's going to, best conserve our policies as it relates to our Constitution, which particular party is going to be principled, is going to talk about values. I mean, we're getting to a point now, guys, where we don't even care to talk about the moral character of our leaders. I mean, this is stuff that used to be a big thing where candidates would take time to talk about their value of being a father and a husband and having integrity and telling the truth. And these are virtues that are so important that I desire to see. And so when I hear, Republican candidates talking, I still hear that kind of language being talked about as important. Like there's things to be conserved, and there are things to be conserved. We can't always be just blowing things up all the time, because once you flip things, you oppressive models, you just overthrow, and then eventually everybody just keeps rotating this thing, and you just never have any cultural stability. And so I think that we're going to be devastated down the road by the consequences of the decisions that we're making in the time that we're living right now. But nevertheless, I think that there's a lot of shady politicians. That doesn't mean all of them are. And I would even be saying this in the Republican Party. Because here's the thing. People that are politicians, they're often power people, and they have to be aware of that shadow. And I think any leader has to be aware of that shadow. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody abuses that. Thankfully, there's some that don't. There are good, upstanding politicians. But there are some that they'll just say whatever, be it Democrat or Republican, to get the power that they feel like they need because they're chasing something. And that makes me really nervous as well. But I think the kind of things that we need more from our candidates is, we need candidates that have virtue, that have values, that care about honesty, that recognize the importance of wisdom, that don't overpromise things for the sake of a vote, that stand on conviction. And that's where we need to be going. And so, Lord, help us. We are in a very, very challenging time. Honestly, just imagine taking the issues and trying to make a biblical case for abortion, a biblical case for gender pronouns, given that God created us male and female with gender distinction, right? So much of Genesis 1 and 2 is all about distinction. He distinguishes between the land and the sea, between the animals, and the birds of the air, between the night and the day, between male and female. There's distinction in God, creative order. Think about trying to make a case for, homosexual marriage, and for just legalizing drugs, and for just letting people out of prison, and just letting them have a go at it. When you look at the Bible, there was a justice system, there was consequences, there was marriage between a man and a woman. If you wounded a pregnant woman and the baby died, that was capital punishment for the person that did that. Why? Because the baby inside the womb was considered a baby inside the womb. And so how people could butcher the Bible to even come to that conclusion is absolutely beside me. In fact, I'll close with this. Even ardent atheists can read the Bible better than utterly liberal, progressive Christians. They'll use the Bible and say, hey, the Bible says that homosexuality is wrong. Hey, the Bible's against sex outside of marriage. Hey, the Bible's against intoxication. Hey, the Bible's against, you name it. And so they can read it more clearly than those that want to hold on to Jesus and their progressive agenda and make them fit together. I think we need to figure out what's going to be our Lord, the values of culture or the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.
You touched on something, Bobby, that I don't think I'd ever thought of before. It seems like some people who are against conserving values, conservative values, but they are all for conserving the planet and conserving, the climate and all this other stuff. And so they do have a sense of being conservative just for things that, I'm not saying it's not important to take care of the planet, but it's like the I don't know, they've got their priorities mixed up or something.
Yeah, conserving your authenticity. So whatever gender pronoun you want to go, they're going to want to conserve that, right? The question is what are we conserving? Why are we conserving it? And what would the Bible have to say about conserving this? And so, again, things are completely and utterly being flip-flop. I'm struggling trusting medicine right now because they're being so driven. Now, this isn't all practitioners, but a lot of them are being driven right now to push this LGBTQ agenda, and they're redefining, what it means to be gender, that gender's fluid. Well, it's not fluid. It's in the genes. You can run a gene test. That doesn't mean that we can't recognize that there's some gender dysphoria going on, and then that's a problem. And we can be compassionate about all of these issues, by the way. This is where I think the Republican Party blows it. They just get so harsh and blasting the left. And I'm going, how are you? So I feel like there needs to be a loving tone. Like, I just wish that you would see people who are trying to conserve not just try to demonize everybody that's on. They try to understand, well, where are you at in this way? Why are you trying to loosen up these foundations? Some of these people are genuinely, they just hurt for people that have same-sex attractions and they want to legalize it. They just hurt for people with gender dysphoria. Well, we can hurt for that too, but we can talk about different solutions. And so I don't think we need to be enemies with each other. Like, I wish Democrats and Republicans alike could learn to at least have a conversation at the table so we can try to validate each other's concerns so that we can learn to unify where we can.
John?
Gosh, listening to you, Bobby, let me first say that what you shared before the break, that was so good. And I could not have said what you said better. And I'm so glad that you said that. And so we really do hope that people that are listening to this program, that if you weren't planning on voting, that you would go out and vote. But the other thing too, just listening to you, Bobby, sharing what you did, it made me think about how there is a new generation of people that are coming of age where they can vote. And so much of how their worldview is being shaped by social media. It's being shaped by what they see, being promoted in Hollywood or music and things like that. And you gave a series of issues that are important. And I wonder how many young people would hear that and say, well, wait a minute, why is he so concerned about that? I think I don't see any problem with that. And I don't see a problem with that. And I don't see a problem with that. And I think that this is another reason why I think for us as a church, it's important that we get back to teaching Scripture, because there is a generation that is coming of age where there is this rise of biblical illiteracy, that when they're having to make major decisions like this that are cultural things, social things, worldview things, it's like we want people to have a biblical worldview. And I just think that for us as pastors, we need to be able to talk through these kinds of issues, not to shy away from it, not just to say, hey, this is something that belongs in another forum. Man, if they're not going to get this kind of conversation happening in the church, they're going to go somewhere else to engage in these conversations. And I think it's really important for us to be able, as pastors, for ourselves to be equipped to know how to listen and to speak. And again, the other thing I'm so glad that you brought up, Bobby, was tone, and not to be so reactionary, but to be able to respond to just how people are thinking about these social and cultural issues, and to be able to then taking them back to Scripture and to be able to start laying a foundation and building upon that foundation a solid biblical framework that's going to shape a biblical worldview. And that's why, again, Bobby, I was just so encouraged when you shared a few days ago about how your son is going to be moving forward to start a podcast to speak to that generation, the generation that is coming of age, that is going to be able to now go and vote. And I think that that's such a great thing to see young people being that voice for their generation, and to say, hey, let me share with you what the gospel means to me, and let me share with you how the gospel has become that baseline. It's become the metric of how I see the world. And I think we just need more of that. But the church has to begin by getting back, rather than shying away from doctrine and shying away from these issues, to be able to come back and set a biblical framework for the next generation.
Bobby Conway?
Yeah, that's really good, John. And thank you for those words, buddy. I would say, Brian, maybe we could go over to Stu, because a little bit of what I would get into has to do with what Stu's talking about. And I think even what John is getting at as well. So let's see what he has to ask, and I can answer that.
Go ahead, Stu. Thanks for calling.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a long-time listener, and I've never called in. So my question, I was listening to, and I forget the gentleman who was speaking. I thought it was Bobby, that was kind of going on about his alarm of the culture and how he needs to take a stand.
That was me, Stu.
The progressives left. That was you. Okay. So what I'm concerned about, two things I've been watching. I was raised in an evangelical fundamentalist, and I have really been puzzled about the difference between Scripture and the culture of modern church, Western Christianity, and conservatism. And I do believe there's a divergence there, and I'd like to kind of know that, when there seems to be some language about we need to get back to these basics, but it seems to me like what we're conserving isn't really full biblical truth. It's more culture.
Like?
For example, let's see, how can I put this without sounding like I'm 1950s American values. In the 1950s, we're not perfect. They may be nostalgic, but they're not perfect. They weren't perfect in the churches. They were not perfect in Christianity. They were not perfect in the world. For example, the idea that our textbooks do teach the truth about the history of America. They do not. And what I'm afraid of is that we are so afraid of the radical left that we are running towards the radical right. Bobby, you spoke a minute ago about the fear that our leaders don't have family values and don't speak truth. And yet the Republicans and so many of my Christian friends and family were so behind Donald Trump. And I can't see how anybody with any spiritual discernment can see that man is a better choice than any other option.
Even Joe Biden, you mean?
The leader. Well, Joe Biden is a family man.
Bobby?
Yeah. Okay. So I would agree that Donald Trump absolutely has his issues. So let me be clear about that. Let's just take a Biden and a Trump, for example. I could see how people could have cast their vote for a Trump, not because they think he's some ideal character or this wonderful role model, but they could have done so without even looking at culture. They could have been a Christian looking at the Bible and asking, you take those two candidates, which one is going to hold up the biblical values in a more clear way? You're going to have a Biden that's going to, he's not going to be for a marriage between a husband and a wife, exclusively, as what we would see in the Bible. So then somebody else would look at it, a Trump in that situation. Well, he was even open to gay marriage. So now you're in a situation, you go, okay, well, now we got to go on to another issue here. Okay, so now think about the pronoun issue. Okay, where are they going to come down on that? Because this is on genders. Does this candidate believe in male and female only as genders? Or does this candidate believe that it's whatever gender distinction you want? I mean, my concern, Stu, is when you have drag queens being brought into school to tell our kids a story for story hour, we have absolutely lost our moral bearings. And so I'm not contesting that our president and Jill don't have a good marriage, but when I see values that are all about critical race theory, pro-homosexual marriage. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be loving to the homosexual community. Has anything to do with what I'm saying. But just, hey, let's create a culture where you have drag queens coming in and telling story hours, and let's bring the drag a person who does drag into the White House and celebrate that. And let's go ahead and just keep on giving money and creating entitlements and not trying to teach people how to have a sense of social responsibility. And let's, it's like, that's some of the problem for me. So I would say, Stu, it's interesting. I think that what you're saying could be true. Like, okay, go to the 50s. Some of the problems with those that were raised by parents of that generation is they didn't feel like their parents were authentic. They weren't real. They weren't transparent. They lived apart. And so then the younger generation felt like, man, we need to be real. We need to talk about our problems. We need to get our problems on the table. But now the problem is we went to the other end of the extreme where now it's all about being authentic. So much so it's becoming so authentic that you don't consider any values that need to hold authenticity in place. Just be authentic to your feelings. And so it was Victorian and to a certain degree, right? It was all about mannerisms. So I'm not even thinking about that stuff when it comes to me walking into a voting booth. I'm thinking about, what does the Bible say about the unborn? What can we learn about that? Well, if you take the life of a woman who's pregnant and the baby dies, then guess what? That's capital crime. What does the Bible have to say about marriage? It's between a husband and a wife. What does the Bible have to say about morality? Well, it has a high standard, and we're called to look at Jesus Christ. What does the Bible have to say about sin? I mean, on the left, it's gotten so bad, and they're legalizing so many things and celebrating a lot of the things that Jesus had to die for. So I'm going, I don't see virtues being held up. What about justice? Like if you do something wrong, that there's a price to be paid. Well, let's just open up the jails, right? Like I was living out in California during COVID and watching the jails be open and then people going out and committing crimes again. And so I'm going, there's not a sense of justice. So I'm not thinking about 1950s. I'm not even thinking about the Republican Party. I'm thinking about, what does the Bible have to say, and which of these characters is best going to keep this intact. And I'm not naive enough to think that any of them are going to do it perfectly, but I feel like I owe it to my conscience and to the Lord and to my kids and to the people that I serve with in this culture to be able to cast a vote that is going to keep some sense of, lucidity and moral intuitiveness in our culture. And all we're doing is uprooting. And I want to say people are uprooting things that they think are weeds, and they don't even know what they're uprooting. They just are part of uprooting things for the sake of being uprooters.
Stu, I'd like you to respond, but you cannot invoke the name of Donald Trump. Go ahead, Stu.
Okay.
No, I'm only saying that because a lot of times people will, well, Trump did this. Well, Trump did. It's like, can we not talk about that right now? Let's just get back to the issue here. Go ahead, Stu.
I too am an independent. I identify as an independent. And what concerns me, though, is that if you look a little deeper, there are things for people with a circumcised heart, like a born-again Christian, would need to ponder. Whether or not this is self-serving, are having much lower taxes is that really a Christian value? Is it really a Christian value to build a wall if we're a Christian nation and shut out our neighbors? Things like that. Like, is that really a Christian value?
Bobby, what would you say?
Well, Stu, this is where, now you're getting at some of the other issues. And I think that, yes, Christians need to not think that just because somebody's a Republican that they perfectly model what the Bible has to say. What would the Bible have to say about, loving immigrants? Now, I would say there should be some sort of a process in place. That's just wisdom. And so what that process looks like might vary from a party to a party. But you're right. And I'm an independent in that way because I could look at different issues and think about the environment. Well, what's the best way to take care of the environment given what I understand about the Bible? So I'm bringing up a lot of moral issues here. There are ecological issues. There are environmental issues. But I would say that we would be unobjective and blind and have party bias if we don't think that there's anything that could come out good from the left, right? Or anything can come out good from the right. I would say that not everything that each party is going to stand for is either good or evil, right? But for me, when it comes down to where it all began, is one, I think, has a lesser of two evils. But then some of these issues are beyond my pay grade. I mean, when you start getting into things like the whole idea that the climate change. I mean, yeah, climate is changing. I get that. But there's so many issues there that's the other thing that's hard. I don't feel like a lot of people cast a sophisticated vote. And I'm pointing a finger at myself here. I think what ends up happening is people are voting around their pet topics. And I think that we as Christians owe it to what are the big topics. And I do think moral topics should trump other issues, like certain entitlements.
Bobby, I told you not to mention Trump. No, I'm joking. Go ahead. Sorry. I'm joking. Right. Go ahead.
Right, yeah. So all I'd say, I'm sure people could be, I would love to have a candidate that I just was so excited about. I mean, that's been a long time since I've seen that. I'm just this guy going, Lord, help us to know how to best cast the vote. And here's some principles that we can think about when we do it.
Yeah. John, any thoughts from you?
No, I think that this is just a good, lively discussion. I just, I'm thinking, what Paul wrote to Timothy about, praying for our leaders. And it's interesting that he's charging that to Timothy and as a pastor to these people in Ephesus, that he wants that to continue being practiced as believers in the context of a Roman Empire where there was no vote, right? It's like Caesar would just be put into power. And yet in this context, Paul seems to be saying to Timothy, hey, do all you can do, as citizens of Rome. And right now we've got this amazing, powerful weapon called prayer. And it's interesting why Paul says to pray. He says, first, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. And so there is that sense of understanding, like we can actually pray, and for us here in the United States, we can actually vote that would tend towards that. Like, we want to have peaceful, quiet lives. We want to be able to have a place where we can practice godliness and holiness. But it wasn't just so that we can sit around and just, enjoy this life and do nothing, but it was so that we could take those opportunities to reach our friends and neighbors with the gospel. Because he goes on, he says, this is good, and it pleases God our Savior, who wants all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. So this is an opportunity for us as a church, as citizens of this nation. We have an opportunity to practice our rights as Americans, but as the church, we get to actually advance forward and look for ways, opportunities that we can be witnesses and share the gospel with others in our communities and in our world.
What passage was that again?
That was 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 5.
So let's read that tonight once the election returns start coming in. That's all the time we have on today's program. God bless you guys. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.